I can tell you the story this morning because Jude's not here, but Jude took on a chore this fall, which I'm not sure. Actually, he doesn't feel too bad about it, but it's about to drive me crazy. He took on the chore of raking the leaves in our yard, which is no small task. In fact, the first year we lived in that house, there's no leaf pickup in Fitchburg. I took 15 pickup truck loads of leaves out of our yard. So we just have an enormous amount of trees, which was one of the things that I really wanted to buy this house for because it looked really nice. Though the realtor did tell us that everybody before us had not put in offers when they saw how many trees were in the yard because they just saw how much work it was going to be a lot of work. For some reason, Jude thought this year was going to be the year he would rake leaves. But he has learned very physically in the muscles in his body that raking leaves doesn't ever end. In fact, it seems pretty clean here, but you know what? Come spring, when that pin oak tree drops the rest of its leaves, I'm going to take another 2 truckloads out of the yards just from what was held before the snow flew. And it's driving us crazy that he literally gets up every day and wants to go get the rest of the leaves out of the yard that have fallen the night before since he's raked the day before. And there is no end to it. And the truth is, taking leaves out of that yard doesn't end. And I do it in July, and I do it in August, and I do it again. I'll do it if it doesn't snow in December. We just keep doing it. And it feels a little futile, and it feels like you're just doing the same chore over and over again. Now, all that's been happening in my life this week. And then on top of that, I got an email from a friend that's she's in Norway at some mission. And she sent me a message too this week about how she's meeting with a group of people and all they want to talk about are the end of times. And they said they're sitting up there in their little base in Norway and they're just planning when Jesus is going to come back. And we had a long discussion about maybe what these passages meant. So all this is happening to me. And then, of course, Friday, I'm reminded of something else. When I'm getting in my car to go home, I actually see something pop up on my phone, and it takes me back to a moment, actually in 1995, when we were living half in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and half in Angola, Indiana, and we were living in this apartment that was Gypsy's grandparents when we were in Kalamazoo because we were there during the school year, and they went to Arizona as soon as it got below 60 degrees in Kalamazoo. So we had their apartment to stay with, and because they knew we were staying there, and because they would come back periodically throughout the winter to visit their kids that all still lived in Kalamazoo, Gypsy's mom and her uncle and aunt, they kept everything going, the TV subscription and all that, and they kept the paper coming. And I had this clear visual memory about 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon of coming up the stairs of that third-floor apartment. And there, in the days when there used to be morning papers and afternoon papers, because I'd read the morning paper, I got up there, and it's the only time I've ever seen this on a newspaper. There was no picture on the front cover, but there was just big block sans serif text announcing that the federal building in Oklahoma City had been bombed that morning and was destroyed, and there were uncountable people dead. And you might think, why did I think about this on Friday? Well, the reason I think about this on Friday is the same reason that Jude wakes up every morning thinking there are more leaves to rake and why these folks in Norway want the world to end. It's that I feel like we're on some kind of cycle where we will never get things cleaned up. And the truth is, on our own power and in our own ways and with our own strategies, we won't. That's what the writer of the Hebrews is saying in this passage this morning. He's saying these priests are offering sacrifices. In fact, in the verses right before this, he told us they only offered them every year. And every year they found out wasn't quite enough, and so they started offering them every day. And it's so interesting the way that the writer of the Hebrews does this. He says they're standing. They're wearying. He says they offer sacrifices again and again, day after day, and then if that's not depressing enough to see the endless load of work like raking those leaves or by being assaulted by these headlines or thinking about what is going to bring about the end of the world, he says, and you know what those sacrifices do for them? Nothing. They never had the power to forgive anybody's sins, and yet they still keep working at it in their human strategy and way. I mean, every time we run into one of these incidents like we did hearing about the events that happened in Paris on Friday evening, the first thing we try to do is look for a solution. And I tell you, we've been looking, that was 1995, that was 21 years ago. And a very interesting thing that you can do it this afternoon, maybe it's not interesting, maybe it's more depressing, is if you Google search Oklahoma City bombing, you will be presented with a timeline of all of the terrorist acts on this planet since 1995, of which there are innumerable ones of. And in fact, their frequency seems to be getting clear, which means that us, like those priests, no matter what our strategies are not getting it even remotely right. Whether your strategy is more bombs or more treaties or less treaties, whether your strategy is more aid or less aid, more embargoes or less embargoes, all of these things that we can think to do in our human minds that might kind of solve this problem of sin that we have, they will all fail. And they all fail. And they just accomplish what those sacrifices day after day did for those priests. They just make them stand, and they just make them tired. So what is the solution? If we're not supposed to sit down in a moment and strategize how might this not happen again and figure out in the best way that we can what to do. Well, I wish the writer of the Hebrews would have done this, but the writer doesn't. The writer instead says there is a way that it all comes to an end, and that is in the person of Jesus. And however Jesus lived, that is a way to take a broom handle and stick it in the spokes of the wheel that presents sin time and time again and spinning faster and faster as if we're going downhill at a steeper and steeper grade. He tells us that priests offer sacrifice that can never do any good, just like all of the strategies that we have, which will ultimately never do any good if they are separated from the person of Jesus. Something about who Jesus is takes that time wheel that spins and spins and spins, and it puts it to a halt. That's what the end time waiting for is too. As we hear in Daniel's little snippet of that book this morning where he's talking about an army coming, or we hear in Jesus telling them that temple that they believe is so important, it will go away. It's because something about Jesus stops that inevitable flow of time, and it gives us a place to stand where we can be comfortable and confident that something good is going to happen in the end. Now, I'm not sure what to do with it. Like I said, I wish the writer of the Hebrews was more expansive, though he does do this very interesting thing. The writer of the Hebrews does mix these, unmixable metaphors together, where he paints Jesus as victim and as victor at the same time. In fact, even in this passage today, he tells us that Jesus, through giving up of himself and not resisting, makes himself a war hero by giving us this image that Jesus has put all of his enemies under his feet. That's not the picture of somebody who's a pacifist, but somebody who's a war general. But the picture in the chapter before, where Jesus is seen as a slaughtered lamb, is not one of a military victor, but one who allowed himself to be taken for the good of others. So I'm not sure what to do with it. But what I do know, what I do believe, is there is a way that we are a community that demonstrates to the world that Jesus is here to break the cycle. That Jesus wants to introduce to us things that don't make sense, mixed metaphors that should not be mixed. And in those things, in those metaphors that are seen as victim and victor simultaneously, somehow if we unravel that, or if we live into that, we can have a better world to live in. And like I said, I don't know what that turns out to in human strategy, if it turns out to anything, or if part of it is just waiting as we see the world spin out of control, as Jesus tells his disciples when he tells them that temple won't stand any longer. Now, if this is a problem sometimes on an organizational level or a national level, that we just buy into strategies and the things that we think are the most common sense, or the things that we think meet the best set of statistics and metrics, that we figured out a way to stem these things. If that is one place where we struggle, I think we also struggle internally. And this is what I mean by I think we get to be the community that shows the world that Jesus has interrupted the cycle, which is what I believe the writer of the Hebrews wants us to do when he tells us that we are to enter the throne room with confidence, that we are not being forgiven over and over and over again, but we have been forgiven. And the way that we do that is that we come here and we worship. We come to this table every morning. And let me put it to you in a way that you maybe have not thought about it before. You don't come to get communion to be forgiven that day. And the communion that you take today doesn't help cover the sins that you committed from the last time you took communion. And the confession that you say today doesn't just take care of the sins that you thought of or carried out since the last time you said that confession and somebody said an absolution over you. We don't do those things because we need constantly forgiven or absolved. We do them because they remind us that one time already we were forgiven and absolved. And these are all acts of gratitude and not of groveling. This roommate that I had in college he went through a bad breakup in his sophomore year, the kind of breakup that only a 19-year-old man can go through, I think. And in this breakup, he had grown up Roman Catholic. He discovered all kinds of things he felt were unsavory about himself. And you know what that made him do? He went to Mass twice a day for several months because he was trying to deal with this sin that was in his life, thinking that he could take care of it. And he felt like he couldn't get from 8 a.m. Mass to noon Mass on this college campus without having to find a whole new way to be absolved again. And when he tells this story, it took him a long time. In fact, he is literally like this priest that keeps offering sacrifices day after day, standing in the temple, thinking that something's got to click eventually. It was only when he came to the realization that he'd already been forgiven for good, and I don't know who actually told this to him or if he heard a voice in his prayers at night. But he said all of a sudden it didn't make him want to worship less, but it made him want to worship differently. And that's what I think we're here to do today. We're to say to the world, we know that the cycle can stop, and we know that the cycle can stop only through the person of Jesus Christ. And the reason we know it is because it has already stopped for us. And that's a much different way of thinking about what we do when we confess and when we come to communion and when we talk to our neighbors and ask for forgiveness. We can only move forward and we can only be confident because Jesus has done this thing, and it is done. It is completed. You are forgiven, not just for the stuff that you did last week, but for the stuff you will do in the future. It is already covered. And if we can show the world that you can live in a forgiven and grateful state, that might be the beginning of getting the world into a forgiven and grateful state as well. Because people who are forgiven and are grateful don't strap bombs on their bodies, and they don't put fertilizer in the tanks and park it outside federal buildings, and they don't go into schools with guns. People that do that feel the exact opposite. They don't feel forgiven. They feel damned already. And they feel like they'll be damned if they don't do it as well, because their damnation will carry on even further unless they can make some kind of purifying difference. We're not a community like that. We're a community of people are forgiven and are grateful. And if we can be that example to the world the way Christ is that example to us, as he is on the cross, and he is both forgiving people and grateful in a place where he should not be, maybe that's where change begins. And maybe that's where peace begins. Maybe that's where confidence and comfort begins. Now, the last image that's in this passage that I think is very important is that the Hebrew writer is very clever here, and that he contrasts this priest that stands in the temple day and day after day, offering sacrifice after sacrifice. And right next to it, he tells us what Jesus does after he sacrifices, which is he sits down. He doesn't need to stand any longer, because it's all the work is done. And he can come in, and I wish I could give this to Jude, that he can come in the house and sit down and not see one more leaf fall on the grass outside. But it's just in that image. Are we going to be standers or sitters? Are we going to believe that Jesus is toiling and exhausted, or that he has done his work, and we can enjoy the leisure and pleasure that he's offering us when he sits down at the right hand of God? Amen.